Well, in the saturation coverage of this Republican presidential contest, there has been a huge amount of coverage of Donald Trump, no question about it. And there's also been a lot of coverage of Ted Cruz, who is now his nearest leading competitor. Even some of Cruz's town hall meetings now get some degree of live air coverage on cable news, not as much, I would say, as those involving Donald Trump. But then there's the third Republican candidate, the governor of Ohio, who is hanging in there despite the fact that he has won only one state, and that is the state of Ohio. So I got an interesting email here from John Cummings, Westport, Massachusetts. John says, great show. Thank you, John. I wonder if you can focus some effort on how the media, that is Barron's on April 4th and others, is handling the Kasich phenomenon, or not handling it. Generally, he's getting the brush off, and he has outlasted Bush, Rubio, Christie, Carson, et al. For example, how they are ignoring or poo-pooing the fact that Kasich is polling higher versus Hillary, how he is gaining momentum, how he is more electable, more experienced, more presidential than his opponents. Well, John, it sounds like you like John Kasich, and I do think you have a fair point. John Kasich getting far less media attention than his two Republican rivals. Now, I don't think that's because the media don't like John Kasich. I think a lot of journalists do like John Kasich and respect what he has done in Ohio, and he's a former congressman, and he has run a very different kind of campaign, a more policy-oriented campaign, or optimistic and high-road campaign. He's avoided the insults, maybe because he sees himself as a compromise choice in Cleveland. The convention will be held in his home state, of course, if neither Trump nor Cruz can get to a majority. But this gets to the heart of why I think Kasich doesn't get as much coverage. And it's not just that he has only won one state, but that's part of it. And it's not just that because he's not a flamethrower, he doesn't say outrageous things very often, and therefore generates fewer headlines than certainly Trump and to some extent Cruz. I think that's a factor too. But mainly, the media have decided that John Kasich can't win. Now, maybe we're all a bunch of dummies, and in fact, he's well positioned. But he's going to go to Cleveland with a relatively small block of delegates. Donald Trump will have the most, there is no question about that. Ted Cruz will have the second most block of delegates, there is no question about that. If you get into a first, second, third ballot, and we haven't seen this even be in suspense since 1976, when Ronald Reagan unsuccessfully challenged incumbent President Gerald Ford. If that happens, I suppose you can say, because I think it's pretty unlikely that somebody who hasn't even run in the primaries is going to end up as the compromise choice, that maybe Kasich can pull it out. But the most likely scenario, according to the geniuses in the press, is that the nominee, even in a contested convention, will be either Donald Trump or Ted Cruz. So maybe that partially helps explain why John Kasich doesn't get as much media attention. He has done some town halls, which have gotten live coverage. He doesn't do as many interviews. I've tried to get him, and the invitation is still out, as certainly Donald Trump, for example, who does a zillion interviews, and some of those are tough interviews, and some of them are easier interviews. But you got to be in the interview game to get the attention. Still, I take your point. John Kasich is one of only three viable candidates, or even three men still standing in the Republican race. After all of these other people, Jeb Bush, who we thought was the front runner, Scott Walker, Ben Carson, Marco Rubio, you name it, are out, then he probably deserves a little more coverage than he's currently getting.